Hey everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. Well, today we're going to be talking about a very convenient truth with my friend and co-author of all my books, Glen Merzer. Please welcome him to the show. Hey, Glen, did you have a nice Thanksgiving?
Yeah, and of course, for like the 50th Thanksgiving in a row, I didn't eat any turkey.
Wow. Well, congratulations. Yeah, you've been vegan, I think maybe longer than me, huh?
Actually, I've been vegetarian almost 50 years. I've been vegan about 30 years.
Oh, I beat you on the vegan part. Well, you're
Yeah,
older than me, so.
I am older than you, yes.
Well, very cool. So tell me what's been going on since the last time
Well,
you were on the
there's
show.
big news. There's big news, AJ. Just yesterday, as you know, I launched my podcast just yesterday. And thank you, AJ, because you helped me with a lot of technical stuff that I was having trouble with.
That's like thanking me for help with technical stuff is like the blind leading the blind, but you're welcome.
Well, you were good. You helped. And now I hate to brag, but I already, just within 24 hours, I have 2 subscribers. I have you and my wife, Joanna. So, this is maybe the first time in my life that I've regretted not having children, because I'm sure I could get them to subscribe. So anyway, if your listeners want to go to the Glen Merzer podcast on YouTube, you'll find it there and you could subscribe.
All right, I'll put a link in the chat. It's already in the show notes, and see if people will subscribe. Well, also, if you had children, they would be able to help you with all the tech.
That's true. Yeah, another reason I guess I should regret it.
Yeah. It's too bad you can't have grandchildren without having children.
That would be better. Yeah, it's hard to do.
My mom always used to say, I wish I could have, had the grandchildren and skip the children, but not a very nice thing to say to us. But, how do you really feel? Well, congratulations on throwing your hat into the ring.
Thank you.
Usually you're more of a writer than a talker.
Well, I've always admired what you do and wanted to try it myself. So we did an episode with Robert Cheek, and that's on the website right now, on the podcast website right now. And also a talk I gave at the Writers Guild about 8 years ago is there. And we've got more that we've banked that we're going to be, moving live every week. So we're going to keep this going at least one a week. I don't know that I'll ever be able to do as many as you do.
Yep. We can't go wrong with Robert Cheek. He's always fun to listen to.
Yeah, he was great.
Well, you saw him. You were recently a speaker at one of the Veg Fest that I was a virtual speaker at.
Right. So Robert and I met at the Michiana Veg Fest, which was a lot of fun. And I was going to challenge him to an arm wrestle there, which I thought would really be exciting for the audience. But at the last minute, I remembered that I have a hernia. So I didn't do that.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And the hernia actually, I'd like to blame my friend, Dr. Silas Rao, for it, because all my life, not all my life, but for many years now, I've been writing books trying to turn the world vegan, right? I've worked with Howard Lyman on MAD COWBOY, and then Howard and I did another book, No More Bull. And you and I have now done 4 books together. And I did Better Than Vegan with Del Schroff. And I, with my books, Own Your Health and Food is Climate, I've tried to make the case for why the world should go vegan. And I like to think that with all these books, you and I and Howard and I have created thousands of vegans. But the problem is that there's a carnivore born every minute. And it's very hard to keep up, So there are now 8 billion people in the world, and I had been content just to help make a few vegans here and there. And Silas said to me that actually we need to turn the world vegan within 4 or 5 years because of what's happening to the climate. So that put a lot of strain on me, to try to turn the world vegan in just 4 years. And I developed a hernia as a result. So that's why I blame that on Silas. So now I'm going to have hernia surgery, because apparently the low-fat, whole foods vegan diet doesn't protect you from hernias.
Well, it doesn't protect you from everything, but it sure protects you from a lot.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. So here's my question for your listeners. Maybe they could post in the chat. Do you have friends or family members, loved ones, people you care about, who you really would love to influence to go vegan, but you don't want to be annoying? That's our problem. See, we know that the low-fat, whole foods vegan diet is the healthiest diet. We know that it protects you from heart disease and cancer and diabetes. And we see our friends who are often overweight and sick, and we want to tell them about it, but we don't want to be annoying. So that's my question to your listeners. Do you have this problem that you want to try to convert people to being vegan, but you don't want to be accused of being, holy and moralistic and judgmental? And so it's a difficult situation. And so what I've done is I've come up with this PowerPoint, which I will do in a few minutes, called A Convenient Truth. And what I try to do in this PowerPoint is give all the reasons why we need to have a vegan transformation. You can find on YouTube some great videos. People like Earthling Ed give a lot of moral reasons having to do with the treatment of animals to go vegan. But what I wanted to do is put all the reasons together so that if you've got a friend and you don't want to confront your friend or your family member, your sibling, you don't want to have an argument about why don't you go vegan, you could say, hey, why don't you just see this video and show this video that we'll be doing now. And maybe that'll be like an easy way to get people to see all the arguments to have a vegan transformation. So that's my plan, that maybe today we can turn the world vegan with this video.
Well, when you asked if people had friends and family, they want to go vegan but don't want to be annoying, Lisa said yes, Linda said yes, Susanna said yes, Diana said yes, Marion, Jackie, all said yes. Kira said, I went vegan in 2004 because I attended a Howard Lyman talk hosted by my local vegan group.
There you go. There you go. So Howard has made many thousands of vegans.
How did you even hook up with him to write books with him?
I was introduced to Howard by Mar Nealon.
Oh.
We went for lunch at Real Food Daily. And initially, they proposed taking Howard's story and turning it into a screenplay. And I wasn't quite sure at that time how to do that. And I said, I'm not sure where the third act climax is. And then Mar said, well, how about a book? And I thought, well, we could try that. So Howard and I wrote the book Mad Cowboy. And I know it's created a lot of vegans, just not enough. So here's my plan. If everybody, all those people who said yes, if everybody, after watching this presentation, can just forward it to, let's say 100 of their closest friends who aren't yet vegan. And if that convinces those 100 people to go vegan, and they then pay it forward and they send it to 100 of their friends, I've done the math. And I think by late March or early April, we could get almost the whole world vegan, except for some pockets of France, Germany, and Texas. So I think we can get there if we all spread this message.
Well, here's a comment. Linda says, if I try to speak about the correlation between nutrition and health, I'm treated like some sort of a crackpot, but all enjoyed my whole food plant-based contributions to Thanksgiving. And let's see. Jean says this is her challenge. How do I help others become vegan?
Right. Well, that's where I want to try to help. And so with that, shall I go into the?
Yes, please.
Okay, so we'll do a share screen now.
Yep. Did you practice? There you go.
All right. All right. So you're going to hear a lot of bad news in this presentation, but there's also some good news. And the good news I call a convenient truth. Now, I want to begin by testing your knowledge to all of Chef AJ's fans out there. Does anyone know who the first vegan in history was? The first vegan in history was a caveman who discovered that it's easier to sneak up on a plant. Now, he tried to convince all the other cavemen of this, and all we know for sure is that he was not well liked. His bones were discovered at a great distance from the cave, and some of them were chewed upon. Nonetheless, here's why I keep trying to carry out this great man's mission. And I've always got to begin with a disclaimer because I've written a number of books on health. And I always have to say you're advised to consult your physician before making any dietary changes. And I have to say that because I am not a doctor or a dietitian or a scientist. So if I'm going to have the nerve to write or speak about nutrition, a subject on which I am not credentialed or licensed, I have to advise the reader or listener to not take my word for it, but speak with their doctor. That's only fair, isn't it? Except, believe it or not, doctors are not trained in nutrition. Here's a quote from a Harvard professor. The fact that less than 20% of medical schools have a single required course in nutrition, it's a scandal, it's outrageous, it's obscene. I agree with the professor. After all, the reason we advise people to speak with their doctors about their diet is because we make the reasonable, normal assumption that since diet affects our health, doctors must be trained in the field. But the truth is, some of them have no more training in the field than your plumber. Now, just think about the stunning, almost criminal incompetence of medical schools around this country in not teaching nutrition. For most people, most of the time, nothing will affect their health more than the food they eat. And yet medical schools treat nutrition as a subject of minor importance at best. I mean, imagine going to law school and not learning anything about the Constitution. So why in the world is nutrition not taught to doctors? Let's analyze it. I've come up with 4 possibilities. I can't think of any others. I don't believe this first one. I don't think medical schools are run by fools. This can't be true. I'm sure that all medical schools are run by highly intelligent, highly educated people. I mean, you'd have to be awfully stupid to not get the connection between, for example, obesity and food intake. And you'd have to be ignorant of decades of science to ignore the connection between heart disease and nutrition. So this can't be it. They're not fools. Second possibility is that doctors don't believe it's their responsibility to keep people healthy. They view their role as the treatment of disease. They're not so concerned with wellness. They're not part of the wellness system. They're part of a sick care system. Their job is serious stuff like surgery or prescribing medicine. They leave the wellness stuff to yoga practitioners and aromatherapy healers. But even if you accept that narrow view of the role of the doctor, the truth is that nutritional therapy is often superior to pharmaceutical therapy. They're not treating disease effectively by taking nutrition out of the picture. So that idea doesn't fly. So let's move on to possibility number 3, that medical schools are corrupt. This is the cynical explanation that I hate to believe. It's true that medical schools do often get a significant share of their funding from pharmaceutical interests. And yes, drug companies and doctors are enriched if the population is fat and sick. But is there some unholy alliance between doctors and pharmaceutical companies so they all profit off people's diseases? I don't believe that there's a conspiracy involved. People who run medical schools don't meet in secret locations with drug company executives and plan how to keep Americans sick. Doctors don't want us to be sick. No. Here's what I think is the real reason that medical schools don't teach nutrition. And that's that the medical establishment belongs to the same culture we do. 40% of doctors themselves are overweight, 20% are obese. They are financially successful, highly regarded members of their communities, and they have no interest in challenging or questioning the way we live our lives. As pillars of their communities, the last thing they want to do is challenge the culture that they thrive in. And so why waste time with nutrition if we Americans are never going to change the food we eat anyway? If you just make the assumption that the food that people eat will never change, then studying nutrition isn't such an imperative. Now, our hopes have been dashed before, but we hope we're emerging from a pandemic that has killed about 1 million Americans and over 6 million worldwide. We're all too familiar with the national debate over vaccine mandates and masking and shutdowns. But while these issues have been debated ad nauseum, we rarely hear about the role of animal foods in the pandemic. First of all, like virtually all pandemics, this one is zoonotic, meaning it started with animals. Most likely a bat that infected another animal at a wet market in China, or possibly a bat that was carried, I'm guessing against its will, into a research lab. Second of all, COVID targeted the obese and those with comorbidities, which is another way of saying that it killed people who were already made fat and sick by the animal food-rich Western diet. But what happens to people who don't eat the rich Western diet and yet contract COVID? Well, a study published in the BMJ Journal in June of 2021 found that those COVID patients who followed a plant-based diet had 73% lower odds of getting severe COVID. Now, a plant-based diet isn't necessarily an optimal low-fat vegan diet. These are just people who ate less meat and less dairy. So if merely being on a plant-based diet gives you 73% lower odds of severe COVID, then if you're on a truly optimal, low-fat, whole foods, vegan diet, then you might even have far lower odds of severe COVID. Now imagine if there were a pill that Pfizer came up with that could lower your risk of severe COVID by 73% or more. Imagine if its only side effects were reduced risk of heart disease and other diseases. People would be talking about a Nobel Prize in medicine for whoever invented that pill. But there certainly isn't big money in what well may be the best answer to COVID, a low-fat, whole foods, vegan diet. Now, did you ever hear Dr. Anthony Fauci or Surgeon General Vivek Murthy or CDC Director Rochelle Walensky ever mention that you could reduce your risk of severe COVID by not eating meat, not eating dairy, and practicing a low-fat vegan diet? Surely that BMJ study crossed their desks. I'll guarantee it. So why wouldn't they mention its findings if doing so could have potentially saved hundreds of thousands of lives? Even a mere plant-based diet gives a 73% risk of severe COVID. So that's over 700,000 lives that could have been saved if everybody followed that advice. So let's analyze it. When a solution to a terrible problem like the pandemic has zero cost and no side effects, or rather, it only has positive side effects that would save even more costs and more lives, if it could be implemented immediately and spare at least 73% from severe COVID and death, why in the world wouldn't any of our leading pandemic spokesmen at least mention it? There are only a few possible reasons. They're not fools, nonsense. These are highly intelligent individuals. Possibility number two, they went to med school. That's true. They did go to med school, and maybe in med school they learned to disregard nutrition. But in this case, with so many lives at stake, that's not much of an excuse. Third possibility, they're secretly making money off COVID drugs. I think that's ridiculous. I don't believe it. They're not corrupt. They're trying their best to save lives. The fourth possibility is what I believe is the truth. They belong to the same culture we do, and they don't want to challenge it. They're not about to give any advice, no matter how important, no matter if 700,000 more lives can be saved, no matter how urgent, if it runs counter to the culture they've grown up in and thrived in. American food is what Americans eat, and that includes a massive amount of animal foods. And the last thing Dr. Fauci, who's now stepping down, or Dr. Walensky or Dr. Murthy would consider doing is challenging their culture. It is not politically or culturally acceptable to challenge the animal foods in our diet. They don't want to get fired. So nutrition is off the table. I began challenging my culture at the age of 17. This is my high school yearbook picture. I wasn't trying to challenge my culture. I was just a kid. But I had a fear in childhood of dying young because so many in my extended family had died young. I didn't know my grandparents. They were dead before I was born. 2 uncles died when I was a teenager of heart disease. My mother developed heart disease around the time that her brothers died. She would get angina pains walking up a few steps to the kitchen. My father's male cousins died young, usually in their 50s. So it was clear that if I ate the way these people ate, I'd be middle-aged at 25. And so I resolved as a teenager to become a vegetarian. So at the age of 17, on the first day of summer vacation after my junior year of high school, I began my vegetarian diet by having an English muffin with jam for breakfast. That wasn't hard. The phone rang. It was my old buddy, Dave. I said, "Hey, Dave, congratulate me. I became a vegetarian." He said, "Congratulations. That's great. Since when?" I said, "Well, you know, since breakfast." And he laughed at me. And it's a good thing that he laughed at me because it's now been almost 50 years since I've eaten any dead animals. Dave himself would become a vegetarian a mere 27 years later after seeing the movie Chicken Run. He was just morally outraged at the treatment of those claymation figures. The next person I told was my mother. I said, "Mom, congratulate me. I'm a vegetarian." She said, "Well, what took you so long to figure that out?" I said, "What does that mean?" She said that when she was pregnant with me, she had resolved to raise me as a vegetarian, but her doctor had talked her out of it. He told her that my brain and my bones wouldn't develop. I'd be small and weak if I survived at all. So that ignorant doctor actually managed to harm me before I was born. Still, the whole thing was mystifying. I said, "Wait a minute, Mom, you're not a vegetarian. Dad's not a vegetarian. Sheila, my older sister, she's not a vegetarian. Why in the world did you want to raise me as a vegetarian?" And she said, "Because, Glenn, when I was pregnant with you, you felt like a vegetarian." My father was the next to get the news. This is him as a small boy with my grandparents whom I never knew. My old man was okay with having a vegetarian son. He was an obsessive moderate. He believed in moderation in all things. He said he had heard good things about vegetarianism. It was fine with him if I was on a vegetarian diet as long as I ate meat once in a while. The next people to learn were my obese aunt and uncle. They were each about 100 pounds overweight. And they were thunderstruck by the news, alarmed that I wouldn't survive my drastic dietary gambit. "Where will you get your protein?" they fretted. Now, I wanted to say, "You're worried about me? Look at yourselves." But of course, you can't say that. Even today, close to half a century later, America remains a nation of fat, sick people sworn to the supremacy of protein. They're nothing if not loyal to a macronutrient they wouldn't recognize if it took human form and slapped them upside the head. Anyway, I needed to reassure my aunt and uncle. I said, "I'll get my protein from cheese." It was an ad lib. And so stupidly, that's what I did. For the next 19 years, I ate no animal foods other than cheese. No meat, no fish, no eggs, no milk. But I ate plenty of cheese to make sure I got my protein. Cream cheese, cheddar cheese, mozzarella on pizza. And in my mid-30s, with no other health problems, at a healthy weight, with healthy blood pressure, I started to experience pains around my heart. I don't know for sure that it was heart disease because I didn't go to the doctor to check it out. Instead, I just asked myself, why would I be getting chest pains on a vegetarian diet in my mid-30s? It seems so unfair. I knew my genes were bad, but this just seemed really unfair. And so I thought about it. I wasn't eating meat because of the saturated fat and the cholesterol. And what was cheese except saturated fat and cholesterol? Cheese is coagulated liquid meat. And so I gave up cheese and became a vegan 30 years ago, and I've never had any pains in my heart since. Now, when I was a vegetarian, and for my first few years as a vegan, I certainly didn't deny it, but I didn't like to talk about it. And I never tried to talk anyone else into vegetarianism or veganism. I wasn't the least bit interested in what other people ate. I was a shy vegan because I was doing it for my own health. Now, sometimes I hear people rephrase that this way. So you were just doing it for selfish reasons. No. How is it selfish to take care of your own health? After all, there may be a few people out there who love you or who need you. Isn't there a better case to be made that it is profoundly selfish to eat cheeseburgers? Now, I was a shy vegan until I met Howard Lyman, a fourth-generation cattle rancher from Montana who turned himself into a vegan animal rights activist. And together, as Howard and I worked on the book MAD COWBOY, I learned about how he had degraded the land as a modern industrial rancher in Montana and what animal agriculture was doing to the land all over the country and the world. There simply is no other industry as destructive to our planet as animal agriculture, not by a long shot. Next to animal agriculture, the coal industry looks like a flower shop. And so what I learned from Howard and from my research for MAD COWBOY gave me an understanding that unless we make some big changes, our planet is headed for catastrophe. And so I stopped being a shy vegan, and now my life's work is to try to turn the world vegan. And it's really difficult to turn almost 8 billion people vegan. It's a heavy responsibility. And that's why, as I say, I've developed a hernia. Now, we are the fattest population in human history. Think about it. It's quite an accomplishment. We are the fattest, sickest population ever to walk planet Earth. 3/4 of Americans are overweight. More than 40% are obese. I'd like to note that when Barack Obama was elected president, obesity stood at about 35% of Americans. And there was a popular cry that all Americans should have health care, and Obamacare was the answer to that cry. Obamacare provided an additional 20 million Americans initially with health insurance, and presumably greater access to medical care. Now, by the time Obama's 8 years were over, obesity stood not at 35%, but it had grown to 39%. Today, not 20 million, but 30 million Americans have insurance through Obamacare. And today, obesity stands at 42%. So clearly, going to the doctor isn't a good strategy for defeating obesity. Maybe because doctors haven't studied nutrition. Now, we face an array of crises. At the same time that we suffer from extraordinary planetary history-making obesity, 38 million Americans suffer from food insecurity, including 12 million children. At least 19 million Americans live in food deserts with no easy access to grocery stores. Our climate is punishing us and affecting our health with wildfires of a scope, frequency, and duration that have never been seen before, especially in the American West. Heat domes have settled over cities that have broken temperature records, sometimes by 15 degrees or more. And if we have to escape to shelters, a pandemic isn't the best time to do that. So where did all these crises begin? Is it even possible to identify an underlying cause? Well, that's the kind of question you might discuss with friends over dinner. Some might feel that our problems are caused by the failures of our government and politicians. Some around the dinner table might blame the Democrats. Some might blame the Republicans. Some might call climate change a hoax, although nobody is likely to call the obesity epidemic a hoax. Some may blame capitalism or socialism. Some might attribute our crises to overpopulation. But is it possible that the real problem is dinner itself? What we eat is all bound up with our culture. Americans consume 8 billion chickens per year. That's about 25 whole chickens per year per man, woman, and child. That's part of our culture. We have fast food joints and restaurants like KFC, Chick-fil-A, Buffalo Wild Wings. Chicken wings are associated with watching football. Don't ask me why. In the South, you could find fried chicken jubilees and festivals. Turkey is, of course, the bird of choice for Thanksgiving. Hot dogs are for baseball games and picnics. Burger joints are ubiquitous. Ribs are for barbecues. The ice cream truck is an iconic symbol of a summer treat for children. We eat more animal foods per day than your average lion. The world consumed 130 billion pounds of beef in 2020. The US accounted for roughly 21% of that, even though we're only 4.25% of the world population. So it's impressive. You might say we're punching 5 times above our weight in eating animal foods, even as our weight balloons. So who taught us to eat this way? Well, our mothers did, and our fathers, and our extended family, our friends and neighbors. We bond with them from infancy, and that bond begins, of course, with breastfeeding. Now, of course, there's nothing wrong with breastfeeding, but there is a point at which you should stop drinking milk if you have any self-respect at all. All other mammalian species are smart enough to wean themselves. Rats are weaned at 4 weeks. They have no problem figuring this out. And yet human adults, believe it or not, actually drink the milk of other species, something they would never do if it involved suckling. Our bonding with our mothers, our fathers, our families leaves us devoted to, accustomed to every aspect of the cultures in which we were raised. And that means that the foods we were fed with love are the foods we remain attached to. To spurn those foods is to defy our parents who nurtured us. Food gets all bound up with parental love. And so our food cultures are as intimate to us, as personal to us, as central to us as our parents. Everyone naturally likes to feel included in, part of, proud of their own culture. And if anything about that culture is insane, we don't notice it. It looks normal to us from the inside. If you're looking at this picture thinking, what's wrong with this? This looks normal to me. Then let's think about the whole process that culminates in this parking lot. Grain is grown, often on land that was once forested. And that grain is usually grown in a fertilizer-intensive, pesticide-intensive way that degrades the soil and pollutes the streams and rivers and oceans. And that grain is then transported to cattle in a feedlot. The cattle eat the grain, and they're also fed a lot of fish. Collectively, cows eat more fish than whales eat. They are the planet's greatest ocean predator. And they're also fed a lot of chicken manure. I think it's fair to say that cattle also reign as the Earth's leading consumer of chicken manure. Now, if you think that's unfair to the cows, well, they get some revenge because chickens in turn are fed cow manure. So it's really a very well-balanced, nuanced, scientifically coordinated system. The cattle are pumped up with antibiotics so that they can survive their unnatural living conditions and gain weight quickly in order to be transported to slaughter and turned into meat patties that will be slathered with sauces so that you don't actually have to taste the rotting flesh, a taste you could never abide if it weren't for those sauces and condiments and salt and sugar. These burgers will bring on death and disease in humans, and people nonetheless line up in cars spewing their exhaust to give their orders to these air traffic controllers, who in this case are wearing masks, not because of the car exhaust, but because of a pandemic that was caused by people on the other side of the world eating animals. This is not a natural way to eat lunch. This is a culture of death and destruction on steroids. This is, in a word, insane. And if this looks normal to you, here's what looks normal to those who grew up in Spain: the running of the bulls in Pamplona. That's a lovely way to spend an afternoon, isn't it? Notice how it again involves cattle. For some strange reason, humans refuse to leave these animals alone. Here's another cultural insanity. You may not believe this, but there are actually some cultures that have royal babies. Photographers can't get enough of them, and people enjoy reading all about them. I'm not making this up. These babies are far, far more important than all other babies because they are royal babies. Now, we could recognize irrationality in other cultures, but not in our own. Here are some more cultural contributions to the world. Baby tossing has been in practice for 700 years. Babies are tossed from the top of a temple to men who catch the babies in a blanket. This brings good luck. It's illegal now, but it goes on. Finger amputation has been practiced as a form of atonement for one's sins. Self-flagellation is practiced for the same reason. Ritual killing, human sacrifice, has been around as long as civilization has. Now, does ritual killing, human sacrifice sound ancient and barbaric? In America, healthy young men and women go to college, join fraternities and sororities, and every year since 1959, there's been at least one hazing death or more. Young, healthy people drink gallons of rum until they die of alcohol toxicity. 44 states have laws forbidding hazing, but it goes on because it's part of the cherished culture of the Greeks. How far removed is this from ritual killing? This is also part of our culture. I'm not really sure what stage of the process of turning chicken into chicken nuggets this represents, but either way, ask yourself, how can anyone be insane enough to eat this? Does this carnage look appetizing? And yet people eat this and they think it's normal. It's part of our culture. This is something we do at the risk of creating a bird flu H5N1 pandemic that could wipe out half of humanity. We cram 20,000 or 30,000 birds together in an ammonia-laced giant warehouses. And relax, these are considered cage-free birds. This is also normal in our culture. We have mechanized killing. Now, very few people ever step into a slaughterhouse, and very few would ever want to, because it's hell on earth. But is it necessary to slaughter animals? No. We slaughter animals not because we need to, but because eating animals is normal in our culture. As normal as a royal baby or the running of the bulls or a fraternity hazing. Our parents who loved us fed us animals. Animal foods are advertised on television. Surely animal foods must be good for us. So let's look at the science. Let's put this myth to bed for once and forever. Here's the science against eating animals. First of all you need to know is to understand macronutrients. Once you understand macronutrients, you realize that meat can't possibly be human food. Well, what are the macronutrients? They are carbohydrate, protein, fat, and we often add to the list fiber and water. Let's start by asking, are potatoes a carbohydrate? You always hear that. Potatoes are a carbohydrate. No, potatoes are not a carbohydrate. Potatoes are a root vegetable, and as such, they're a healthy human food. Yes, they contain more carbohydrate than protein or fat, but they actually have more water than carbohydrate. 100 grams of potatoes will have about 87 calories. That's less than 1 calorie per gram. About 80 calories of the 87 will be carbohydrate. About 7 will be protein. Almost 1 calorie will be fat. 2 grams will be fiber. And so when you eat an ideal human food like potatoes, you get plenty of carbohydrate to fuel your cells. You also get a good complement of protein to repair, grow, and regulate your cells. You get a smidgen of fat to store energy and carry fat-soluble vitamins. You get fiber to regulate sugar absorption and to cleanse your system. And you get a lot of well-filtered water. You also get all kinds of minerals and vitamins, as well as antioxidants to prevent cancer. You cannot get fat by eating potatoes. Indeed, you could lose a lot of weight. Like all human foods that are good candidates to be staple foods, potatoes are a filling, starch-based food low in fat. Now that we understand the macronutrient profile of a great vegetable, the potato, let's talk about meat. Is meat a protein? No, meat is not a protein. I'll say it again. Meat is not a protein. Meat is an ideal food for cats and other carnivores. It is not a human food. For humans, meat is effectively a slow-acting toxin, likely to make you sick or kill you over time. Depending on the cut of meat, it will be about 50% fat and 50% protein. It has 0 carbohydrate, none of the natural fuel for human cells. Meat has no fiber. It's low in vitamin content. It has no antioxidants. That's why you'll never see a study that says that roast beef or pork helps to prevent cancer. But you will see many studies that meat causes cancer. More than 1/3 of the fat will be saturated fat, known to team up with cholesterol to cause heart disease. And meat, of course, contains cholesterol, thereby supplying all the nutrients you need for a heart attack. So just look at what meat has and what it doesn't have. It doesn't have carbohydrate to fuel your cells, doesn't have fiber. The protein that meat has is acidic and sulfuric and has been proven by Dr. T. Colin Campbell to be carcinogenic. So the protein in meat is not good for you. And meat contains toxins and endotoxins, and it causes inflammation, which is a good way to engender or aggravate heart disease and immune conditions, autoimmune conditions. So look at the macronutrient profile. What in meat could possibly be good for you? No carbohydrate, no fiber, carcinogenic protein, heart disease causing fat, and not as much water as plants. Here's another thing meat has. Meat is often injected, whether you know it or not, with a solution to try to hide its foul taste. Walmart, for example, says a majority of its fresh meat offerings are enhanced with a solution of water, salt, sodium phosphate, and natural flavorings. And so when your server asks, what's your choice of protein, beef, chicken, or fish? Your server might as well ask, what's your choice of saturated fat? Or what's your choice of cholesterol? Or what's your choice of bacteria and endotoxins and sodium phosphate and flavorings? Meat is not a protein. Now, an understanding of macronutrients alone should be enough to convince you that meat isn't human food, but then the science of comparative anatomy reinforces the case. Scientists compare humans with all mammalian carnivores, omnivores, and herbivores. They contrast the shape of the jaw, the movement of the jaw, the gape of the mouth, the dentition, the presence or absence of amylase, a starch-digesting enzyme in the saliva, the length of the intestines, the hydrochloric acid in the stomach, the presence or the absence of claws. And in every category, humans line up not with the carnivores, not with the omnivores, but with the herbivores. We are anatomically herbivores. It's simply science. And still, despite all this evidence, the paleo side answers with its most powerful, challenging argument, the canine tooth argument. If humans weren't meant to eat meat, why do we have canine teeth, like, for example, the tiger? Well, that's a tough one. That's a really hard argument to answer. So let's take a look at this striking similarity. Well, the word is the same, though, canine. It's a linguistic, not an anatomical equivalence. So you can see why people get confused. Tigers, though, do not get intimidated by our canines. All right, third on the list of the science against eating animals, we have evolutionary biology. If an understanding of both macronutrients and comparative anatomy doesn't convince you that meat isn't human food, as they should, then consider what we could learn from evolution. This is yet another way to deduce the correct human diet, since apparently we've misplaced our instincts, maybe while looking at our phones. Now, we know perfectly well which animals we're most closely related to, the primates, and especially the great apes, all of whom are very nearly card-carrying vegans. Chimps, orangutans, gorillas eat a diet that's 95 to 99% plants. Remarkably few gorillas ever get asked where they get their protein. And given that we share 99% of our DNA with chimpanzees, we couldn't possibly be designed to eat a diet that's the polar opposite to their diet of fruits and vegetables. Now, a few times a year, admittedly, male chimps will surround a monkey in the trees, catch it, break its neck, and break apart its living flesh, which they will give to female chimps in exchange for sex. Now, I'm not going to condone this. This is appalling behavior. But they're not doing it for nutritional reasons. They're doing it to get lucky. Fourth on the list, we have scientific studies, which sometimes can be complex and ambiguous. And as I'll explain, it's often because they're designed badly. Nonetheless, all serious scientific studies come to the same conclusion, that meat and dairy and eggs are harmful, and that plant foods and a high fiber diet offer the greatest health benefits. We have 70 years of science, for example, that meat and dairy cause heart disease. So let's take a very quick tour through some major studies. The Framingham Heart Study, launched in 1948 with over 15,000 participants. High blood pressure and high cholesterol are determined to be major risk factors for cardiovascular disease. Studies on blood pressure always find the same thing. Blood pressure is lower in vegetarians than in meat eaters. In fact, other studies have found that the lowest, healthiest blood pressure is in vegans, second lowest in vegetarians, highest in meat eaters. Now, study after study concludes that eating meat raises your blood pressure, and we know why, because you're clogging your arteries with saturated fat and cholesterol, narrowing the channel for blood flow. There's no mystery here. And blood pressure is dispositive, meaning it settles the case. If you're trying to decide whether there are any health benefits to animal flesh, all you have to know is that it raises your blood pressure. It's impossible. Think about it. It's impossible that humans were meant to eat a diet that causes hypertension. There's no case to be made for high blood pressure. Nobody claims that it's desirable. And nobody, to my knowledge, disputes the science that meat eating raises your blood pressure. Nature would not design us to eat foods that give us strokes. Now, the most meaningful nutritional studies are the work of Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn Jr. And that's because his studies weren't about consuming less meat, like Ansel Keys' studies that promoted the Mediterranean diet. Dr. Esselstyn's studies stand out because his patients, who had heart disease and were thought to be out of options, his patients were put on an optimal whole foods vegan diet without added oils. These are the only heart studies in which there is a cohort eating an excellent vegan diet. Dr. Esselstyn placed 198 heart patients on a low-fat vegan diet. 44 of them had already had heart attacks. In this 3.5-year study, 177 of the 198 were compliant. Of those, there was only one cardiac event. Almost all of them who reported angina at the start of the study found it improved or eliminated. Heart disease was reversed. But of the 21 non-compliant patients, 13 experienced cardiac events, including 2 deaths. Now, I'm sure Dr. Esselstyn would have preferred that all his patients were compliant. But in reality, the non-compliant patients helped prove his case because they did so much worse than the compliant patients. 62% of the non-compliant patients experienced cardiac events over 3.5 years, compared to 0.5% of the compliant patients. And so we know the optimal diet to escape heart disease, a low-fat, whole foods, vegan diet. Now we have an epidemic of type 2 diabetes, which rises in lockstep with obesity. It's skyrocketing in America. In 1958, there were about 1.5 million Americans with diagnosed diabetes. The population of the US has doubled since then, but the incidence of diabetes has gone up by more than 20 times. An additional 96 million have pre-diabetes. 20% of our children are pre-diabetic. Type 2 diabetes, we know, is caused by the fatty, animal food-rich Western diet. And so the answer to type 2 diabetes is the exact same answer as the answer to heart disease. Then there's autoimmune disease. The more we learn about it, the more central we understand the role of the gut to be. And what creates a healthy gut is a diet high in fiber, unpolluted by chemicals metabolized from animal foods. This study showed that a vegan diet with a high intake of fruits and vegetables and the elimination of animal products protects against the development of autoimmune conditions. And we know why. Dietary fiber alters the composition of gut bacteria and increases bacterial diversity, thus preventing intestinal damage that leads to autoimmune conditions. And so the same diet protects us against autoimmune disease. And then there's cancer. Dr. Campbell's The China study explains how animal protein itself acts as a carcinogen. There are no studies anywhere in the medical literature, go back as far as you want, that find any animal foods to be anti-carcinogenic, whereas there are mountains of studies of plant foods that have been found to be anti-carcinogenic. Antioxidants are found almost exclusively in plant foods. Dairy has been linked to breast, ovarian, and prostate cancer. One of the most potent cancer-causing compounds in the world is casein, a milk protein. Another is insulin-like growth factor 1. Remember, our endocrine systems did not evolve under the influence of ingested lactation hormones from other species. This is a relatively modern stupidity. And so our protection against cancer comes from antioxidants, from fiber, and a low-fat diet. The anti-cancer diet is going to be the high-fiber diet, rich in antioxidants, full of colorful foods. That's plants, not animals. All right. Now, beyond all the scientific studies, there's a lot we can deduce from the growing movement of doctors who have discovered on their own, no thanks to their medical education, that they can effectively treat their patients and improve their diet by advocating a plant-based diet. This is my friend Steve Lewenda. That's the same guy. Steve went to medical school where he was taught nothing about nutrition. He himself was overweight and pre-diabetic. He was unfulfilled in his early years as a family doctor because he didn't feel he was helping anyone. He prescribed the medicines that he was taught to prescribe, and his patients would come back fatter and sicker, and he'd have to keep adjusting their medications. And he'd give them medications for the side effects of the medications he'd already prescribed. The whole experience was depressing because nothing ever worked. Steve told me of one patient he was particularly proud of who took his statin drugs religiously and got his cholesterol way down. And Steve thought, finally, I've helped one guy. But then that guy died of a heart attack with much improved cholesterol numbers. Then during a road trip, Steve's wife, Patty, played an audiobook about the plant-based diet. Steve thought this must be Hawken, because surely if you could improve your health so much with diet, someone would have mentioned it in medical school. But he reluctantly agreed to go along with his wife's plan to eat this way for a week or two and see what happened. Well, he lost a lot of weight and he felt great, so he decided to keep the experiment going. Eventually, within a year, he lost 70 pounds and improved all his blood work immensely. And he, very importantly, he incorporated the lessons he learned into his practice. And now he asks his patients about their diet. He encourages a plant-based diet. And now he reverses type 2 diabetes in his patients, helps them lose weight, helps them get healthy. His work has become immensely meaningful and satisfying. He learned, in short, to do his job correctly. And he excels at his work now, and he sponsors lifestyle change programs at his Kaiser Hospital to help people transition to a plant-based diet. And he's one of many. There's the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, whose members include primary care physicians, researchers, professors, nutritionists, nurses, health coaches, and many others. The Plantrition Project is starting very soon, if they haven't started already, to provide free virtual nutrition education to future healthcare professionals. So there's a movement of tens of thousands of doctors and health professionals who have seen the light and who have begun to practice plant-based medicine. And as you know, AJ has interviewed most of them on her show. But there is not, thankfully, an equal and opposite movement of legions of doctors who are practicing butter and bacon-based medicine. Why is that? If that stuff was good for you, given the fact that Americans seem to love eating these foods, surely there would be a growing movement of doctors saying, hey, just double down on the beef. But no, all the momentum is on the side of plant-based nutrition because that's where doctors like Steve are seeing real results with their patients. And yes, doctors want their patients to be healthy. Once they get some nutritional education, many doctors get a little bit angry when they ask, how come we were never taught about this? And so here you have the science against eating animals. All you have to understand is macronutrients. On top of that, there's comparative anatomy, evolutionary biology, 70 years of scientific studies, and the experience of thousands of independent-minded doctors. There is no serious scientific debate about the optimal human diet. It's the whole foods, low-fat, plant-exclusive diet without oils or sugar or processed foods, period. There's no legitimate nutritional controversy. You hear nutrition is controversial. That's not true. There's no controversy. There's only contrived controversy, contrived usually by people who want to make money by exploiting our culture's reluctance to stop eating what their parents fed them. Now, I told you before that I don't believe that medical schools or doctors or our leading pandemic spokesmen are corrupt. Now I'll show you an example of pure corruption. The USDA nutritional recommendations. This is the government's My Plate recommendation. It used to be called the food pyramid. It's created by the USDA. That's the Department of Agriculture. Now, wait a minute. Why is the Department of Agriculture telling us what to eat? The answer is obvious. Their clients are the farmers growing the food. So we have to eat whatever they grow. We are advised, as you can see, to eat 2 cups of fruit a day. Now, where's the science on that? Are there any studies in 70 years of science? Are there any studies that something bad happens to you if you have 3 cups of fruit or 4? Any studies that show that people have 3 cups of fruit get sick? Of course not. So why are they limiting it to 2 cups of fruit? They also advise 3 cups of vegetables. Now, are there any studies that 4 cups of vegetables will harm you? Of course not. It's all about calories. The 3 cups of vegetables will give you about 300 to 400 calories. The 2 cups of fruit will give you about 150 calories. So between the fruit and the vegetables, we're up to about 500 calories. Then they recommend 7 ounces of grains, not 8 ounces, God forbid. No, it has to be 7 ounces. Are there any studies that eating 8 or 10 or 12 ounces of whole grains has a downside? Of course not. So why are they limiting it to 7 ounces of grains? Well, depends on the grain, but a good guess might be that 7 ounces of grain will give you 200 to 300 calories. So now between the healthy stuff, the fruits, the vegetables, the whole grains, I hope these are whole grains, we're looking at about 700 or 800 calories. Now they recommend 6 ounces from something they ridiculously call the protein group. Now look at this group. What in the world does an egg have in common with a lentil? Are they cousins? How did this get to be a group? But according to the half-wits at the USDA, this is an actual category of food because they all contain protein. Well, vegetables also contain protein. Why couldn't they get into the group? Romaine lettuce has more protein per calorie than meat. Grains also contain protein. How come they couldn't get into the group? How did roast beef get in the same category as cannellini beans? Are they related? This is self-evident insanity. Now, in spite of the fact there isn't a single legitimate study in 70 years, not one, showing any health benefit to eating animal flesh, and there are countless studies that show the opposite, these recommendations suggest 6 ounces of animal flesh. Well, that could add up to 500 calories right there before you lather on the sauces, as people inevitably do, or cook it in oil. So now we're up to the final recommendation. 3 cups of dairy. Well, if that's 3 cups of milk, that's 450 calories. They want grown men and women to drink 3 cups of milk a day. Who would do that? Let's say it's 3 cups of cheese. Well, then it's 1,500 calories. Let's say it's 1 cup of cheese and 2 cups of milk. That's 800 calories. So we've got 800 calories from the dairy, 500 calories from a mere 6 ounces of animal flesh before adding any sauces of oils. That's 1,300 calories right there. And there you have your answer. You've got roughly 2/3 of a normal daily intake of calories with 0 fiber from the dairy and the meat. That's why there isn't enough room for the healthy stuff. That's why they're limiting you to 2 cups of fruits and 3 cups of vegetables and 7 ounces of whole grains. That you damn well better limit those pesky fruits and vegetables to leave room for the highly caloric animal flesh and lactation products. But what if you were to choose from the alleged protein group 6 ounces of beans instead of animal flesh? Then you're talking maybe 60 calories instead of 600. So that makes a little bit of difference, doesn't it? That could add up to 50 pounds a year. All the science tells us to eat fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes and have a fiber-rich diet. The culture and economic forces are telling us to eat flesh foods and dairy. And if you do so, you will consume so many calories that you won't have room for the healthy stuff. So the compromise that the USDA came up with is eat a little bit of the healthy stuff, but leave plenty of room for the stuff that makes you fat and sick. This is your tax dollars at work. So why do we believe that nutrition is a controversial subject? There's no conflict between science and science. There's a conflict between science and culture. The culture is resisting the science, and hucksters fill the void, reinforcing the prejudices of the culture. Why don't we believe and act upon all the science that tells us not to eat meat? Now, nothing affects our health more than the ability to breathe. The past 7 years have been the 7 warmest years on record. 2021 was the 7th consecutive year when the global temperature has been more than 1 degree Celsius above pre-industrial levels, edging closer to the limit laid out in the 2015 Paris Agreement on climate change. Now we know that climate change is caused by the burning of fossil fuels, right? Well, in part, it's a factor, but the burning of fossil fuels is the second leading cause of climate change, and it is a distant second. The leading cause of climate change is animal agriculture, and that's because of carbon opportunity cost. 37% of the world's non-ice land surface is grazed. If even less than half of that is restored to forest, we can sequester enough carbon dioxide to return us to pre-industrial revolution levels of atmospheric CO2. The signature greenhouse gases of animal agriculture, methane and nitrous oxide, are far more powerful greenhouse gases than carbon dioxide. Methane is 120 times as powerful. Nitrous oxide is 300 times as powerful. So why are we being misled? Why is animal agriculture rarely discussed? And most of the leading climate spokesmen like Al Gore concentrate solely on fossil fuel burning. Well, let's begin with the visual bias. You can see smokestacks from energy plants and manufacturing plants belching carbon dioxide and other pollutants into the air. You can't see the methane and carbon dioxide being produced by 1.5 billion cattle on the planet. And then let's add in the sheep and goats and the manure from 25 billion farmed animals, which also produces both methane and nitrous oxide. Most of us don't see the lagoons of manure that are fouling our landscape. We also can't see the forests that are no longer there, that have been cut down or burned to make room for cows, and the land that has been gradually grazed into desert. In the year 2021, Dr. Sailesh Rao published in the peer-reviewed Journal of Ecological Society a paper demonstrating that animal agriculture is responsible for at least 87% of greenhouse gases. He arrived at this figure by estimating that at least 41% of the grazing land could be restored to forests, and by estimating the carbon capture of the soil in those forests, as well as the above-ground vegetation. And yet, Sailesh's estimate did not include the effects of animal respiration from 25 billion farmed animals exhaling carbon dioxide. His estimate did not include pasture maintenance fires set annually all over the world in grazing lands, did not include bottom trawling of the oceans, decreased sequestration from diminished phytoplankton populations due to industrial fishing and diminished sea forests. Now, if you include all these factors, some of which are very hard to measure, you find yourself estimating that animal agriculture may be responsible for well over 90% of greenhouse gases. But as Dr. Rao undoubtedly felt, once you demonstrate that the number is at least 87%, you kind of hope that that's enough to make people pay attention. This is a NASA fire map. The red dots represent the pasture maintenance fires on just one day around the world. These fires are set to burn all vegetation that cows don't eat. Nobody is quantifying how much carbon is being released into the atmosphere from these fires. And the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is not factoring in how much vegetation and forests are lost to create grazing land. Now look at the deserts, the brown patch in the middle of this satellite image. From the Sahara in northern Africa to the deserts of the Middle East, to the Thar Desert in northern India, to the Gobi Desert, a 6,000-mile stretch of mostly desert. And we know that it was all forested or savanna in the past. The Sahara was forested less than 10,000 years ago. So what happened less than 10,000 years ago? Humans began cutting down trees and grazing goats and cattle on the land, exacerbating other factors. Humans are clearing the Amazon now for cattle grazing. And one day soon, there'll be a big patch of brown in South America called the Amazonian Desert. There is some hope, though. There's a new president in Brazil who wants to stop that. We are destroying life on the planet. Animal agriculture and industrial fishing are the leading causes of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, deforestation and desertification, ocean dead zones, biodiversity loss, water scarcity, and pandemics. Is it worth it to cause all that damage for a burger? The bun is made from wheat. You don't need animal agriculture for the bun. You don't need it for the lettuce or the pickle or the tomato or the mustard. All you have to do is replace the beef patty with a portobello mushroom or a bean burger or a soy burger or a lentil burger or any kind of veggie burger. It won't taste so fatty. In fact, it'll taste better. And your taste buds will quickly learn to appreciate not eating so much fat, and it'll be far healthier. So let's compare social goods. The burning of fossil fuels provides transportation, heating, energy generation, the warming of homes, fuel for cooking, and virtually all of our manufactured goods. That's a lot of social goods. I'm not an apologist for the fossil fuel industry, but you've got to admit that we've all benefited in many ways from the burning of fossil fuels. What does eating animals provide? Obesity, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, autoimmune diseases, food poisoning, pandemics, noxious lagoons of manure, prolific waste of water and grain, and less food. Yes, less food. We call people who raise animals for food farmers, but remember, they're actually reducing our supply of food when they feed grain and other food to their animals. So if you define a farmer as a person who grows food, they're not really farmers, are they? They're anti-farmers. The subtitle of my book, Food is Climate, is a response to Al Gore, Bill Gates, Paul Hawken, and the conventional narrative on climate change. So why don't these three leading spokesmen on climate ever acknowledge that animal agriculture is the leading cause of climate change? Why do they focus almost exclusively on fossil fuels? I've analyzed it. Here are the only possibilities. No, they're not fools. Come on. These are highly intelligent men. We know that's not it. Are they corrupt? Well, it is true that Al Gore has some cattle on his land, but the man is a multimillionaire who couldn't care less about the comparative peanuts he must be earning from the few cattle on his land. Bill Gates is giving his money away because he's got more money than he could spend in 1,000 lifetimes. Early in his career, Paul Hawken turned down a fortune to keep running his small business because he has integrity. These men do not have a corrupt bias for their opinions on climate. The reason they won't focus on animal agriculture is they're part of the same culture we are. And so when you're part of a culture that eats meat, you don't question whether or not we need the grazing land and how much carbon dioxide we might sequester if we restored forests. You don't question whether or not we need 25 billion farmed animals on the planet. Just as medical schools don't question whether it might make sense to teach nutrition because they assume that our culture will never change its dietary habits. Just as doctors don't ask their patients what they eat because they assume that Americans are meat eaters and can never change. Just as our pandemic spokesman would never dare to mention nutrition, climate scientists don't challenge land use and the fact that we absurdly dedicate 43% of the non-ice land surface of the earth to growing animals for food. They don't question the destruction of the oceans, which represents 70% of the planet, so that humans can get 3% of their calories from fish. As long as you don't question these things, as long as they're givens, then of course you have no choice but to focus on fossil fuels. There's nothing else to talk about. How do we heal this planet? Now, a doctor never dresses and bandages a wound and says, here's what I want you to do. Go home and scratch it every day. No, they say, leave it alone and it will heal. We are self-healing mechanisms. So is the earth. This is the rational way to solve the climate crisis. Leave as much of the earth alone as we can. 70% of the earth is the oceans. We need to end industrial fishing. We also need to protect the oceans from plastic and other pollutants, but industrial fishing is what's harming the oceans far more than anything else. If we stop eating animals, we can leave more than 80% of the earth alone to heal. 70% of the earth is ocean, and then of the land, more than 40% of it is either devoted to grazing or devoted to growing feed for the animals. So we begin by protecting the oceans. If we stop eating and exploiting animals, we can leave more than 80% of the earth alone, and we could create enough carbon capture to return us to pre-industrial levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. This is land that was grazed in Koresh, India, near the edge of the Thar Desert, and then rewilded. This is the difference that 4 years of rewilding can make. Imagine if we allowed that to happen to the 37% of the land on Earth that is grazed. And so one diet, our natural human diet, protects against heart disease, type 2 diabetes, obesity, cancer, inflammatory diseases, food scarcity, water scarcity, climate disaster, deforestation and desertification, ocean destruction, biodiversity loss. Isn't that convenient? Isn't it convenient that by simply eating human food, by merely returning to the natural human diet, the foods we were designed by nature to eat, we can solve so many of our problems and lead longer and healthier lives? All we need is a global transformation to a vegan diet. And all that's stopping us from this beautiful transformation is our own cultures. Now, but wait a minute. Aren't cultures a good thing? Don't people like to go around the world and experience different cultures? Isn't that what the tourist industry is all about? Don't we celebrate cultures? Sure, we can celebrate cultures, but we have agency. We can say yes to ahimsa, harmlessness, and no to baby tossing. We can say yes to flamenco music and no to bullfighting. We can say yes to fraternity and sorority gatherings and no to hazing. We can say, I love you, Mom and Dad, but you fed me the wrong food. We forgive you. You didn't know better, but we do now. I have no trouble at all forgiving my parents for this mistake. They didn't know. They were fed the wrong food by their parents. But we need to break this cycle immediately if we are to survive on this planet. Let's face the reality. There is no place for this in civilized society. And there is no place for this, or for this, for us as humans, with the world at stake. The ultimate question is, can we grow up already? That concludes my talk on A Convenient Truth. These are my latest books: Own Your Health with Chef AJ, Food is Climate, which also has some recipes by Chef AJ. And I've now begun the Glen Merzer podcast. You could find me at glenmerzer.com. And I will stop the screen share now.
Are you serious that that we eat more, not you and me, but people eat more meat per day than a lion?
Yeah, well, we eat animal foods more often. A lion will make one kill, eat that meal, and then might not eat for days. But we, every day, we humans, not you and me, but we humans are eating more, animal foods 3, 4, 5 times a day. It's crazy.
That is just, I can't believe it.
Yeah.
Wow. So is this, do you go around like to colleges and universities and give this presentation, and how is it being received?
Well, I have done this online a few times, and I did this at the Michiana Fest. I would be happy to do it more often in person, except for the fact that we have a pandemic now because people eat animal foods. and traveling isn't so easy, but I'm open to it. If people want to give me invitations to give this presentation, I am happy to do so, either by Zoom or, if possible, in person. I also might want to, some of this was personal to me, my family, but I can create a version of this that won't be personal to me, and other people could give this presentation. So if people want to contact me at glenmerzer.com and say, hey, they'd like to give this talk, I'll create a version that other people can do without pictures of my parents. If everybody does this and spreads this message, I got to get the world vegan so that, my hernia doesn't come back.
Oh, you're funny. You're funny. People are saying great presentations. Roseanne is saying, thank you for an enlightened presentation. I love to see Roseanne here because, she won the Breville when we had a giveaway, and the Breville is on a Black Friday special today. So this is like the best day if you don't have the Breville to buy it. So here's a question, Glenn, from Rebecca. Are you familiar with the Indiana Lifestyle Medicine Network?
No, I don't think I am. I do know one plant-based doctor in Indiana, and he's a very good guy named Timothy O'Donnell, but I didn't realize there was a whole network of them.
Well, maybe you should find out. Maybe Rebecca, maybe you can contact Glenn through his website and let him know. He sounds like he'd be a great guest for your podcast.
Yes.
And Jean says she would be interested in having this or translating this into Spanish, so she should contact you as well.
Very good. Please do so. We could translate this into all the languages.
Wow. Well, yeah, I actually haven't heard of this presentation. It's very good, Glenn.
Thank you.
Nice job. You're doing good on the PowerPoint. You may not know how to put your videos on YouTube, but you can do a PowerPoint.
I'm gonna learn that skill. I'm gonna learn that skill.
The thing about technology is it's frustrating, but it can be learned. But you would hope that people could learn this information too. Why do you think they're so close to it? Is it just culture, or do you think there's just some kind of addictive nature to animal products? Because, like, I can understand processed foods. It's hard for people to give up processed foods, vegan or not. Most processed foods, you could argue, probably are vegan. They may not be healthy. And that's even hard for people. But animal products, especially dairy, people just don't want to give them up.
It is culture. I have people I love who, have cancer and are sick and, have heart disease. And it's like talking to a brick wall sometimes. It just seems to them that what they're doing is normal and what you and I are doing is not normal. And of course, it's the reverse. We're eating like humans and they're not. It's just crazy for humans to be ingesting animal lactation. That's insane. And there's no evidence that any animal foods do us any good at all. So why do it? But they were taught that way by their parents. This is the way their friends eat. This is the advertising that they see. When was the last time you saw an advertisement for broccoli? You don't see advertisements for zucchini. You see advertisements for chicken, fried chicken. Where I live in a Midwestern college town, I've returned here. I lived here 40 years ago. And there was a restaurant at that time called the Tao, T-A-O. And it was just this great restaurant. It was vegetarian. I don't think it was vegan, if I remember correctly, but it was vegetarian. And it had whole grains. You could get brown rice and tofu and vegetables. And it was just a beautiful place with stained glass windows and plants. It was a one-of-a-kind restaurant. And that is hard to find these days. Now everything is a chain restaurant. They opened a chain restaurant. Joanna and I were downtown a couple months ago, and we see this long line at a new restaurant. And what was it? It's something called, I think the restaurant is called Raising Cane, and it's something called Chicken Fingers. Now, first of all, chickens don't have fingers. So right away, they don't know what they're talking about. But I'm looking at these college kids, half of whom are obese, on this line to eat fried chicken. And, and nobody's coming up with a restaurant now like the Dow, and I feel like life was better then when we were young. There was more charm, to the restaurants and the culture. And now it's like everyone's being beaten into submission, and they're going to eat what they're fed, and they're going to get obese and sick. We got to fight back from that.
Wow. Okay. Let's see. There's a question. Let's see. Has your own family come around to this view? Asks Rebecca.
Well, my parents are deceased now, but my mother lived to almost 99. And remember, she had heart disease in her 50s. So I got her to live that long by doing her food shopping, particularly in the last 15 years or so of her life. I got her to pretty much get off meat in her 50s and 60s. And then in her 80s, she was a vegan, and in her 90s. She would sometimes look at me and say, Glenn, why am I still here? And I'd say, well, Mom, because I do your shopping. My father had Parkinson's, so he didn't live as long. But again, I tried to make sure he didn't eat meat, and he lived to almost 89, but had a poor quality of life for the last 10 years of his life. But other members of my family, no, I don't think I can name another member of my family. And so that becomes discouraging to me, because I got to try to turn 8 billion people vegan, and I am having trouble with my own family.
It seems common to do that. Let's see. Linda says, what can I say to my 56-year-old daughter? I'll see her today. She refused to come to my house for Thanksgiving because she did not want to eat my restricted diet. Well,
I'd say ask her to watch a video. Tell her to look at AJ's show from today.
Yeah. There's a question how we met from, you and I met? Michelle Wolf, right? Weren't we introduced by Michelle Wolf?
Well, I think we met at one of Jeff Nelson's what did he call his
healthy
lifestyle? Yeah, because this was when you were overweight, AG. And this was like in I don't know, 2010 or so. And there were all these great speakers, Dr. McDougall, Dr. Greger, whoever would speak at these healthy lifestyle events. And then as soon as they finished speaking, they would take questions. And you were always the first one to ask questions. And you would ask 3 or 4 questions. And I was thinking, who is this loud woman who is, so assertive here? Who is this woman? And everybody knew you, but I didn't know you yet. So either I came over and introduced myself, or somebody introduced us. And that's when I met you, I think.
What do you mean loud woman? Okay, I'm ending this show now. No, kid, I'm just kidding. But I have to end the show because I have another one at 11. We've got some Black Friday specials coming up, and we got a cooking demo at 11. But yeah, this is a great presentation. So guys, if you want Glenn to give it at your organization, or you want to translate it into another language or support his work, contact him through his website, and please sign up to be a subscriber on his YouTube channel, because when we started the show, we only had 2. So, I should go check and see if you have any more right now. It's just because I've been asking people to, to please subscribe, because you need to get, I think, to about 1,000 or 2,000.
I don't know. But here's something we can offer your listeners, AJ, and maybe you could put this in the chat. If they buy Own Your Health or Food is Climate.
Oh, you got 27 subscribers.
All right.
That's amazing. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. And so if you haven't already read Food is Climate or Own Your Health, and you get one of those books or both, send proof of purchase to OWNYOURHEALTHBOOK@gmail.com. AJ, could you put that in the chat? OWNYOURHEALTHBOOK@gmail.com. Just write bonus in the subject line, and I will send you a bonus file of whole foods recipes by my wife, Joanna, and Chef AJ's video making a double layer vanilla frosted carrot cake.
So a receipt for any of your books, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, got it. Well, Glenn, thanks so much.
Thank you, AJ. Great to see you.
All right. You got like 30 subscribers now. You better get going on that channel.
Wow. All right.
All right. Well, you take care.
You
And
take care, AJ.
thanks to all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back in 15 minutes. We have another show. Take care. Bye-bye.